Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Long stories today. Let's do it. What have you seen or experienced that most people wouldn't believe? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I provided medical treatment for a young Iraqi national who was shot by a ricocheting bullet. It hit the ground in front of him, ricocheted upwards into the right thigh above the knee, came out by his hip, then hit him in the neck, ricocheted off his jawbone, and came out of his mouth, taking a teeth from the right front side of his mouth with it. It was disgusting and amazing. First, when I was in second grade, classes were cancelled because there was a polar bear on school grounds. Nobody believed me when I tell them that. Second was when I was 21. My great aunt passed away suddenly. She was only 66 at the time. Before I'd gotten the call from my mother, I was at the grocery store near my great aunt's home. I was walking around the shop getting the things I needed when I bumped into my great aunt. She hugged me and said, "Hello, dildo deity. I can't take long because I've got somewhere to be, but I'll try to talk later." I walked out of the store about 10 minutes later and got in my car. Then my mom called. My great aunt had passed away sometime the previous day in her sleep. She was a spinster, so no kids or husband. I told my mom that she was crazy and that I had just seen her at the grocery store. Nobody on this earth, not even my husband, believes that this happened to me. Ball lightning. I was 9 years old and living in New Mexico. Our house had a sunroom that overlooked the surrounding desert, and I'd occasionally go there, against my mother's wishes, to watch the lightning storms that were common to the area. On the day in question, as I looked out across a nearby creek bed, I caught sight of a glowing sphere that looked to be about the size of a basketball. My first thought was to go out and try to find the thing that I'd seen, but I knew that I wouldn't get away with leaving the house, even if the electrical storms hadn't been an issue. The area was prone to flash flooding, so I just stood and watched, all the while dreaming up fantastical explanations for what I was witnessing. After the apparition had vanished really, I went and told my mother what I had seen, and was informed that it was likely a once-in-a-lifetime experience. She insisted that I repeat the story to my father, who confirmed her assertion of the phenomenon's rarity, with some jealousy in his voice, and also told me that some people didn't believe that ball lightning even existed. I had the last part proven to me the next day, when one of my class's parent volunteers accused me of lying. The venomous doubt that she voiced was actually rather upsetting, especially since I had been so excited to share my story with the classmates. It would be 19 years until someone actually confirmed the existence of ball lightning, and I have to say I feel a little bit vindicated, and also relieved to know that I hadn't imagined the entire thing. Not sure what the hell it was. We, Boy Scouts on a high adventure trip, were camping in the Lake Powell, Utah, USA area back in 95 or 96. It was awesome to camp under the stars, no tent needed, no light pollution, and could see a lot. Then you see something bright fly by, hold in its position for a few minutes, then zigzagging around the sky. 90-degree turns, what looks to be every few inches. Then, two more sets of smaller lights take off at a much lower altitude. You could tell that these were probably fighter jets, with the lights being the running lights on the wings, that came in front of the opposite direction. The jets came in and then looped back and chased off the brighter object off. Then about 30 minutes later it came back without the jets following it. All of the guys I was with stated it was just a satellite, but I don't believe any type of orbit would allow an object to make sharp 90-degree turns like that. Given the vicinity to Groom Lake, Area 51, the most likely excuse would have been experimental testing at night. At the time, I thought it might be a UFO. Well, if you're in that area and you know there's going to be test flights going on, there's
Sure, it was definitely something probably from the government, so that's it.
In 4th or 5th grade, I took a bite of my hot dog at lunch. I guess I didn't bite all the way through it, actual Frank, because I inhaled and swallowed the whole thing. I panicked for a second, and I coughed it up. I could have choked on a Frank. Nobody effing believes me. Also, when I had my wisdom teeth removed, I was put under general anesthesia. When the doctor started putting me under, he said one of my medications would briefly make my butthole itch. It did. Weeks after this, I told my mom, and she didn't believe me. I've been told I hallucinated. I don't know. My wife insists that she saw an older man dressed in a navy blue mechanic's jumpsuit standing on our deck looking in the window. When she saw it, she screamed and said there was someone trying to break into the house. I looked outside and saw nothing, and the way our deck is leveled, being only 10 seconds after the scream, it would have not been enough time for anyone to get off the deck and out of the yard. I told her it was nothing and no big deal. About 3 months later, I was speaking to a neighbor who lives a few doors down. This was the first time we met. She asked which house in the block was mine, and I told her. She said, "Oh, I was friends with the owners, Tom and Barb. They were great. We would always bring our car over there when it needed to be fixed. Tom was a good mechanic, and it was convenient." Now, I bought the house from the daughters, who were managing their parents' estate. Both parents were dead. I don't know what to make of it, because I don't believe in those sorts of things. My wife has no mental health issues or anything like that, and she insists to the point of near tears that a man in a navy blue jumpsuit was looking in the window. Neither of us knew anything besides that we were buying the house from the daughters through an estate. A few months ago in Toronto, I saw a pair of twins during my commute to work in 2 different places in a span of 20 minutes. One getting off 8 stations before my stop on the subway, and the other one at the Starbucks across the road from my work. It wasn't possible for him to beat me with any other transport. I wasn't seeing things. They looked exactly the same. Effed me up for the rest of the day. Maybe not that far-fetched, but the chances of that in a city this big? Story time. When I was younger and had just arrived in Tokyo, I set up about making acquaintances. I soon befriended a girl, we'll call her Susie, and we had some strange experiences together. I talked about her, the first one, in the earlier post, but the following was the most supernatural of all of them so far. I had always wanted to get a new job. I was a trumpet player who freelanced at jazz bars. I really enjoyed the work, but it was tiring, and I worked late, and at short notice sometimes. Gigs were scarce, especially since I didn't have my own band. The pay was shit, but Susie always spotted me if I really needed it. So one day, we're talking as usual, and she tells me there's a job I can do. It's a little off the grid, but it pays well. I was like, yeah, let's try it out, you know? She told me it had to do with memories, and I was super psyched, like it might be something cool. So we go out together one day to this guy's apartment. He lives in a penthouse in Roppongi, some super sweet pad. Meanwhile, I live in a one room in Shibuya, so I'm thinking this job has some good prospects. The guy, some graying-haired man in middle age, tells me the nature of his work, which is, get this, making people disappear. We're not talking relocation programs for victims or people who need to be protected, that sort of shit. He laid out the details of the job. Basically, if you had enough cash, you could make anyone, including yourself, disappear. Depending on their stature and prominence, the cost varied. Moving the person was the easy part. There were many ways to make someone disappear. You could give them a new face or a new identity. You could kill them, whatever. What was important, he said, was to make it seem like they were never born in the first place. That meant wiping out birth and school records, etc. But beyond physical evidence, the job also entailed wiping out memories. Now, this man had some skill in wiping memories, and he could do it fairly easily without any drugs or chemicals. He didn't go into detail, although naturally I asked if it was hypnosis or some shit like that. He told me he would only tell me if I agreed to apprentice under him. It was tedious for him to have to individually wipe the memories of all the people associated with this individual, so he was looking for a capable apprentice. Apparently, Susie had done a little promo for me because he was willing to take me in. He informed me that I would be basically doing grunt work while I learned the ropes, and I'd only been taking care over of his duties in a few years, depending on how fast I learned. At this point, we'd been talking for like half an hour, but I wasn't really interested. He wrapped things up and told me to give it some thought and contact him through Susie if I would like. He seemed tired, just the way he moved and talked. On the lift ride down, I remember clearly Susie told me, "He speaks like a Salman Rushdie novel, doesn't he?" And I replied, Rushdie had nothing on him. That was the strangeness of the man. He had a very factual eloquence to him, but he said things strangely. It isn't easy to describe. He isn't the kind of guy I'd like to wipe my memory, though. I ended up not taking the job. I'd rather do something I really enjoy than slog over some half-legal business, even if the pay was good. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask. I tell people this story all the time, and even though most laugh, I entirely stand behind my experience, and I still remember it vividly. I was about 15 or 16 when my parents had to dog sit for one of their friends. The dog stayed with us for about 3 to 4 days. I love pups and decided it was okay for him to sleep in bed with me. Well, one night everyone was asleep, including myself and the dog. Since the dog was in my room, I left the door open so he could come and go as he pleased. In the middle of the night, the dog stands up on my bed and starts barking. Not a loud, ferocious bark, just a small warning bark. He then yelped again, louder this time. I finally sat up in bed and tried to get him to lay down. Next thing I know, I hear something run into my room. I was a messy teen with all of my homework on the ground next to my bed. When I heard the sound of something run into my room, it was followed by the rustling of my papers on the ground. It was loud, and I heard a cat screech next to my bed near the papers. The creature sounded like it ran in my room, ran a few feet fast circles over my papers and books, and then bolted out of my room, screeching again. When it bolted out of my room, the dog actually sprung off the bed and ran after the sounds. I started screaming for my dad. He throws open his door, still in his underwear, and I scream at him, telling him that there's a cat in the house. We searched the entire house and found nothing. The dog had circled the house once and then didn't seem interested anymore, like nothing had happened. It was the strangest thing I've ever experienced, and I still can't explain what it was. All I know is that my one ghost experience was with a cat ghost. When I was about 7 or 8, I remember being put to bed by my parents. I was laying in bed and couldn't fall asleep. I then felt this odd feeling that there was someone watching me. So I looked to the side of my bed and I saw 2 heads right by my face. They looked like my mom and dad's heads peering over the bed, but they were shadowy. I was laughing and looking at them, and I remember touching their heads. The odd thing was, my room was at an angle in which I could see my parents' room. They were still awake with their light on in their room. My mom was ironing and my dad was watching television in their bed. So I realized these people in my room weren't my parents, so I started crying hysterically for them to come running in. The heads just stood there until the lights were turned on in my room by my parents. That room still creeps me out till this day. I once saw a little girl at my mother-in-law's house when there was no way that she could possibly be there. It was New Year's Eve and we were having dinner. Someone asked me to get something in the kitchen, and when I got there I saw a little girl running around at a table and then hiding behind a glass door. One of those ones that some kind of texture so you can't clearly see what's on the other side. That was between the kitchen and the laundry. She was wearing a red dress, had light skin, and black hair. After a second, she was gone. I was a bit scared, and my boyfriend at the time, asked me what happened. After I explained, he told me not to mention to his mother because she was too afraid of that kind of stuff. A few hours later, she was telling us about a weird dream she was constantly having of a little girl running around the house and wanting to play with her. But she was the only one who could see her, and she described the same child. After I heard that, I had to tell her what I had seen. And I remember nobody quite believed me, but everybody was actually terrified of going even to the bathroom alone after that. I was a unforgettable New Year's party, at least. In undergrad, when preparing for one of my finals, I realized that if I got a perfect score on it, the end result for my grade would be the same as failing, a B in the class. So I focused on studying for my other finals instead of worrying about it. When it came time to take the test, 100 questions, I knew the first half because they were old test questions, got a perfect score on that. Then the unbelievable part. It came time for the second half, and I guessed on 50 questions, completely guessed, not educatedly guessed. I got 49 of those right. The probability of that happening is astronomically low. At 1/4 49, it's pretty crazy that I did.
Well, I mean, statistically, if it's a 4-question answer or 4-answer question, yeah, that's pretty wild, but I guess it could happen. Should have played the lotto instead.
My mom's story. My grandma's mom's mom was diagnosed with a brain tumor. My whole family worked, and she required enough supervision that we had to put her in a nursing home. My mom went to visit her once, and a chair was pulled up next to her bed like someone had just been visiting. My mom asked who had stopped by to visit her. My grandma gave the name of a teacher she had taught with 40 or so years ago. My mom was a little surprised since this woman lived a few states away, but was ultimately happy that a friend had come in to visit my grandma. A few days later, my mom saw the teacher's obituary. The woman had been bedridden for months and couldn't have possibly visited my grandma in an earthly sense. Hard to believe, but I think it's awesome that two women who hadn't seen each other in years and were on the brink of crossing over until and used it to their advantage. Stalling out in an airplane. I'm in the Navy, and our crew was flying a normal sortie flight. At the time, I was still a junior air crewman and didn't know what to expect, as it was only my second deployment with that squadron at the time. Well, to pass by long flights, we usually do push-ups or other physical activity when we're not exactly busy. Anyways, we have one guy doing push-ups, and all of a sudden, we hear an extremely loud screeching noise, and everything gets extremely heavy for a couple of seconds. The guy doing push-ups next to my seat starts to push himself off the floor as hard as he can to counter the balance, the new force that was acting upon us. When he pushes off, his entire body starts floating toward the ceiling. It was at this time everyone on the crew started floating around in 0G. My sandwich was directly in front of my face, floating, coming apart. Little did I know we were falling 6,000 feet out of the sky over the ocean. Then, as quickly as it started, everything came smashing down all over the jet as the pilots regained control of the aircraft. I'm surprised no one was injured. Me, being new, thought it was awesome, but the more senior crewmen were freaking out at the time. A couple of strange things happened in our older new house. They can be explained away, but stuff like this never happened before, nor since. One night, my wife wakes me up and points out in our little master bath being all groggy. I come to and realize that the shower is on full blast and steam is billowing out of the bathroom. I got up and checked it out, and the shower door was closed and the water was turned on hot, full blast. The thing is that the door is always open, even when we're trying to warm up the shower. So it's not like one of us sleepwalked in there and turned on the shower and closed the door, because it's not what we would naturally do. Anyways, pretty creepy. Second incident happened that same winter. I got ready to go to work, stepped outside to get into my car, and noticed that there were horses and hoses were turned on full blast in the side of my house. But the creepy thing was that there was fresh snow everywhere a few days before and not a footprint in sight. And no, it was not cold enough to freeze the line and unfreeze it. My first thought, someone or something turned that on full blast. I live in the US. I was involved in a sex ring that is similar to the ones currently being exposed in the UK right now. I went forward to federal authorities for years. They all said it was not their areas. I work for people who are more loyal to the perps than to the children who were abused. I'm in my 50s now. No one believes me that, and that makes me sad. They marked me as crazy because I was in therapy for a long time to recover from the long-term abuse that began when I was 4 and lasted a long time. They all see me as crazy when really I healed a long time ago. I don't even carry a mental health diagnosis anymore. Work people trash me because I went to therapy. Work also crashed my career when I went forward to tell. So pretty much survived a really rough childhood and then years of therapy. After all of that, I became an advocate for survivors. After I did that, my career went into the trash can. Telling about abuse when the public loves the abusers can pretty much ruin your life. And as a bonus, I was involved in a torture ring called MK Ultra. I could not produce proof of that, so no one believes me on that either. Despite all of this, on most days, I think the world still has more good people than bad. Some of the best people I ever met helped pull me out of the dark hell I was in. I wish that Utah had justice and media like that in the UK. As a child, I grew up in a house where some odd things occurred. Several things happened. Here's the one I can't explain. It was in the evening and I was in my bedroom. I always had issues believing in God. I wanted to believe he was real but had a hard time with it. In Sunday school, they talked about God doing miracles. I thought if God performed a miracle, I would be convinced he existed. I had 2 nickels that I put on my desk, which was against the wall. I prayed silently to God that if he was really real, to move the nickels from the desk to the center of the room several feet away. I prayed silently and opened my eyes. Nothing. I thought if I left the room, maybe that would work. I prayed silently, left the room, and then came back. Nothing. Then I thought maybe I should pray out loud. So I did, and left the room. I did that about 3 times. On the 3rd time, when I came back into the room, the nickels had moved from the desk and were sitting in the middle of the floor. Everyone tries to explain it away as someone playing a trick on me. I don't have brothers or sisters. The only other people in the house were my parents, and they were on the opposite end of the house watching TV and completely oblivious to what I was doing. Can't explain it. Well, I have 2 stories, both related since they took place during a death. The first one takes place in a hospital where my friend's grandmother was dying. I was waiting in the waiting room when my friend was called by the doctor to see his grandmother. The silence that remained in the room was intimidating to say the least. I waited for 20 minutes until my friend and his family came out crying. At that very moment, the doctor announced that she had passed away. The weather outside went from spring to a horrible winter storm. That same weekend, the funeral took place, and it was no different. As we headed toward the cemetery, at least 50 crows had lined up along the power lines on the freeway, and my friend's mom silently whispered, "They are here to pay their respects." Now, that might not be what you expected, but the next one might be it. My friend, the one who lost his grandmother, also had his mom lose her best friend. At the cemetery, the priest told us to bow our heads and to pray so that she may get accepted into heaven. It was a cloudy and dark afternoon as we prayed and the priest read a passage about the journey to heaven. I decided to look up. Everyone had their heads down, and I had mine looking around. I saw a light come from clouds, and I lay differently on top of the tombstone. During the reading, the light got brighter. It was a weird thing to look at. Everything around us was dark, but hers was this light that made the scenery look like an sunset. At most, That's what I can describe it as. As the prayer began finishing, the light slowly receded into the sky, and I was the only one there to witness it. By the time the priest had finished, the light was gone and the darkness came back. I died in my sleep one night and heard the voice of the devil. I was standing in a place where everything was white in all directions except for two discs, a silver one above my head and a black one under my feet. Both of the discs were composed of liquid. I can hear an exchange of dialogue between a booming authoritative voice and a raspy, sinister one. Then, after a brief silence, the raspy voice laughed. I began to sink into the black disc as the laughter intensified and black tentacles wrapped around me. Suddenly, an arm reached down towards me out of the disc above my head, and I could hear my recently deceased aunt's voice. I reached out and grabbed the hand and immediately woke up. When I woke up, I could hear the raspy voice saying, "You cannot escape me. Your soul will be mine." I could not open my eyes or move my body, but I could still hear his voice. Nobody believes me when I tell them that this happened. It was extremely vivid, and I could feel the weight of my soul return to me when I finally opened my eyes. I've heard lots of stories about people hearing their pets after they die. Thought they were just ghost stories. I had my cat Clyde for 10 years. He was hit by a car December 5th about 7:30. I had gone outside to try to get him to come in after a bitch neighbor lady came to yell at me about some shit that didn't involve me. He'd get out when I opened the door. He was not supposed to be outside, but I was calling him and he came running right when the car came by. I still get sick whenever I hear a similar sound to the thump. At least I got to hold him one last time. For the few weeks following, I'd hear the click of his nails on the wooden floor. He had two extra mini underformed feet on his front legs that always had the nails sticking out. I heard him jumping on top of the washing machine, where his food was kept, and jumping down. If I was opening a can, I'd hear his yowling right behind me. Sometimes after Christmas, we were sitting in the living room. It was my dog, my husband, and I. We had boxes set in a pile in the corner of the room, where I normally sit and am sitting now. So I know there is no draft there. Anyways, the boxes started rustling, and the entire pile fell over. Then I heard a soft thump and rustling, just like how Clyde would jump into boxes and roll around in them. The dog went berserk and was barking and whining at it until the noises stopped. It was not pleasant, because it felt like he wasn't moving on. I don't know if there is an afterlife. All I know is that when you die, you leave this place forever. The craziest time was when I walked outside and heard him meow. Then I heard my own voice say, "Clyde? Meow? Clyde? Meow?" Back and forth, like we always used to talk to each other. It was insane. I don't hear him so much now, but it's still incredibly disturbing to be curled up on the couch with both dogs to hear from the living room the distant click, click, click. Years ago, I really believe I did encounter a demon, the first and only time ever. I couldn't see it or anything, but I felt its presence. It was absolutely the most horrible and frightening experience I've ever had in my life. Have you heard of people that were in dangerous situations and they got lucky because they had a feeling something was very wrong? This is a kind of instinct that you stayed with us even now, when we don't technically need it anymore. Well, even though I could rationalize and tell myself there isn't really anything there, I can't see anything there, it was like every cell in my body was screaming at me to get the hell away from where I was, because there was something very malevolent in the room with me. The room, this presence, felt heavy and oppressive, and my body was in full flight mode and ignoring my rationalization. Besides being frightening, can you just imagine how confusing the situation was for me? I literally felt like I was in danger, like there might as well have been an axe murderer or something standing there. I couldn't run though, because where I felt it was standing was between me and the only door out of the kitchen. I don't know how long it was there, but I was just a sobbing mess and pressed as much against the wall as I could get, just trying to keep my distance from this thing, and I just prayed to God. From an outsider perspective, I probably looked insane. I'd like to think it wasn't a demon. I have a pretty open mind, but that is just the feeling I got from it. I've had plenty of panic attacks later in life, and they have felt nothing like that. Whether it was a demon or not, or just some very random hallucination. Despite the fact I don't do any drugs, this experience was very real for me, and I still think about it from time to time. When I stayed at my friend's house one night, I woke up in the middle of the night at about 12:30 because I got severely dehydrated. When I walk out of the room, I see a figure with a shadowed face with a dark green raincoat. I swore that it was my friend's tall brother, but I looked into the living room to see if he was there, and he was on the couch. The figure seemed to follow me around the house. I had no idea what to do. I just kept trying to put off the fact that maybe a ghost is following me. They never said anything or did anything to try and scare or hurt me. But as a kid, I was effing terrified. I didn't yell or anything, or did anything to try and scare or hurt me. But as a kid, I was effing terrified. I didn't yell or wake anyone up. I just went into the living room and found a blanket, covered my head, and stayed there until I fell asleep. Very weird night for me, and I will never go back to that house again. Oh boy, never thought I would share this in any way, but here goes. I'll start with a question. What's your earliest memory? You playing in your room, eating dinner at the table with your mother feeding you? I have one memory earlier than that, and it terrifies me. The first thing I remember from the beginning of my existence is black, literally black. I'll try to describe it as best I can. My first memory I can think of is a sort of darkness that had some sort of energy to it. I don't know how else to name it. Everything was black, but I could feel something from that black. This is the best way I find it to make it understandable. That vibrant black felt like it lasted for 5 seconds or less, but I get the feeling it was longer than that, like it always existed, but that's how much I remember from it. After the 5 seconds passed, the blackness stopped vibrating. It felt like when you are put into general anesthesia for a surgery. You're awake, then half a second later, you're not. After that, I remember noise and people shouting. I think it was at a public playground for little kids. My parents had taken me out to have a little fun. It was like waking up from a dream. While all this happened, I had absolutely no idea what was happening. I hadn't learned a language or didn't even know what thoughts were. I went from a vibrant black existence to a little boy's body within a second. I honestly don't know how best to describe all this. Your opinion is as good as mine. I've tried to start a deep conversation of this kind to people, but all I got was disbelief and that it was impossible for someone to remember something like that I was making it up. I really wish I did. I was in the casino of a cruise ship playing roulette when some guy around 30 years old walks up to the table and tosses two $500 chips on the table as a way of getting in on the action. He puts a max bet of $100 on the number 21, and he puts money on the corners of it as well, and everyone is just amazed that someone is doing this, but then it happened. The ball is put into play and lands on 21. People start yelling and freaking out, and the whole casino starts clapping and cheering. The guy remains calm, takes as close to $4,500 worth of winnings, but keeps his original bet on the table, and he gets it again. The whole casino was going crazy. He won close to $9,000 in the total of those two rolls. I've seen similar. I've seen guys hit straight flushes on Caribbean Stud and the next hand get four of a kind. I've myself hit numbers back-to-back, not with $100 on it in roulette, but statistically, the same number could come up every time. But it's still wild to see, and good for that person. Hope they use that money for a good cause. When I was in rehab last February, I got a bad feeling that one of my mother's parents was going to get sick and die, and I wouldn't be able to see them. I specifically remember voicing this exact concern to my mother, and she recalls it as well. About a week later, my mother came to visit again, and she broke the news to me that my grandfather had been diagnosed with cancer and barely had any time left. This February, I began to get a really bad feeling in my stomach that one of my grandparents on my father's side was going to pass soon, despite them being in moderate health. I bought plane tickets up to their home one weekend to visit and say my goodbyes in case it was my last chance. 3 days after I got back from my visit, my grandmother was diagnosed with an incredibly aggressive form of cancer and was dead within 3 weeks. I've told people about this, but goddammit, they look at me like I'm crazy, so I've started keeping mum. It was stormy outside one day, like electric stormy, but without the rain yet. Very muggy, from time to time flashes of lightning and thunder. I was in my apartment alone and in my room reading. Suddenly there's this giant boom. Lightning definitely struck nearby. I look up from my book and am about to look outside to see if a tree was struck, when all the hairs on my body rose a bit. You know, that feeling when you're all charged up from shuffling across the carpet? That's what I felt. Then I shit you not, a blue spark came through the wall, crackled through the air above my head, rather close to the ceiling, so I was not in danger of touching it, and smacked the other wall. It was fast, but not as fast as a typical spark. I could follow it with my eyes. I jumped up from my bed to make sure that the wall wasn't scorched. It wasn't. Then looked outside. No obvious signs that a lightning hit anything. I now wonder if it didn't hit the fourplex I lived in at the time. Top floor, too. That would explain the big boom and the charge. The spark is what makes people look at me askance. I don't think it was something supernatural or any bullshit like that. I think it was just a shitload of static electricity that built up into a ball lightning thing or something. I used to tell people because it was an interesting bit of natural phenomena to witness, but stopped because people looked at me like I was nuts or lying. I see dead people. No, seriously. I have a couple weird stories. The first being more recent. My oldest sister passed away around 2.5 years ago. She and I were really close and talked all the time. The day before she died, I went to do laundry and smelled her very distinctive favorite soap from a small indie company in my bedroom, and could have sworn I heard her say my nickname, the one she only used for me. It was super weird, and less than 8 hours later I got a call that she had just slipped away. The second story, of many, is a little weirder. I was in a long-term relationship with a guy which eventually turned abusive in many ways. I got out of it, but ended up going back after a lot of manipulation. Spoiler, this did not last long, because I found out I was pregnant. Somewhere between 8 and 15 weeks along, I miscarried and left him again. After that, wherever I went, there was a little girl who would follow me. White dress, pale complexion, dark hair. It took me forever to figure it out, but I'm convinced she was my child. Hallucination? I doubt it. I was not the only one who saw her. My best friend had seen her. Her dad saw her and used to try to get me back. And my now husband has seen her, all with the same description. When I was a kid, I saw a man in a suit and a top hat, a little fat with a mustache, standing outside the door of my grandma's house. He was just standing there looking at me. I freaked out, obviously, but I didn't tell anyone. Years later in my 20s, my grandmother told me that my mother used to see a mysterious figure in a suit and top hat, fat with a mustache, when she was a kid in her room, the same one where I saw him when I was a kid. So I told them that I saw him too, and everyone was freaked out. And we have no idea what the hell that is. I don't even talk about these things anymore because I know everyone thinks I'm nuts or making it up. One day I smelled smoke and got a really bad feeling. I looked all over and asked people, but no one else smelled the smoke. That night, I wouldn't say that I had a vision, but more like I randomly thought of this little boy who I didn't know. The next day I saw a very similar little boy had died in a house fire the previous day while I was smelling smoke. When I was a very little girl, I had a dream that it was important for my mom to call her old friend. I messed up and told her the wrong lady because I wasn't really sure exactly who it was, but it was one of her colleagues from years ago. A week later, one of her old colleagues from years ago killed herself. I was living in another country and I randomly called my parents in the middle of the night. It happened to be while the police were there because of something bad that happened to my sister. Sometimes I feel sick to my stomach in certain places, and I get a vibe of whether it's a good place or bad place. One time I almost puked walking into a courtyard only to find out later that many people were executed there. I used to get upset when people didn't believe me, but now I just hide it because, honestly, I wouldn't believe me either. A particular man constantly appears in my dreams, all of them. Dreams, nightmares, and the in-betweens. I've told my friends about him and they find it intriguing, but I imagine they think I'm being theatrical. I can never quite remember his features, but he's dressed head to toe in a white suit and one eye is all black while the other is all white. Thing is, I've never dreamt of him directly. He's always in the background or in the periphery. There's never a sense of malfeasance nor of benevolence from him either. He's just kind of there. Back when I was in college, a friend and I got into doing Ouija boards as idiot college kids do, and the board started saying really dark, creepy things about me. That I would die, that I would have someone important to me die after 2 years of knowing them, and so on. I go home for the weekend because I'm freaked out. I lived close to home. I had a nightstand next to my pillow, and when I woke up in the morning, my head was on the nightstand. My body was diagonal over the floor, and my ankles on the bed. It was like I was levitating, but not, just oddly perfectly balanced. The next morning, later that day, I heard a crash in my room. My lamp was perfectly upside down, balancing on the pointy ornamental whatever that was at the top of the lamp, blinking on and off. Needless to say, I never touched another Ouija board again. I also never slept in my room again. When I'd go home, I would sleep on the couch. Long story short, I saw an orb in the corner of my room and I felt death. I knew someone was going to die. I don't think it's a mental health thing. It was effing weird. And I've had a lot of experiences like that. My ex thinks I can read the energy around me, but I really honestly don't know how I feel about it. Because it's just so often with me, it freaks me out. My mom got into a car accident about 6 months ago, and she almost died. She had a super huge tumor in her cervix. The night before she got into the accident, I had a dream she did, and I saw a lot of blood. My dad believes I have it too. It's so strange. I'm an atheist, but I've experienced so much paranormal shit. I was recording myself talking, and after I asked a question about someone dying, I could hear in the recording a very human-sounding gasp. There was also this one time where I felt like something dark was in my room and watching me. I think that's most likely a mental health thing. My friend is spiritual and just told me to go get out of the room for a little bit. That is really effing weird. Ever since I was M'd at 6, I used to see this man smoking at my kitchen table. He had no face or details at all, just a yellow-orange color on his body. He was smoking. I saw him a lot. One day, I was on the stairs and he was right in front of me. I decided not to fear him anymore and walked through him. I never saw him since. My niece has a really odd story. My aunt died about 1.5 years ago. My aunt was a drug addict and an alcoholic. I loved her so effing much, and it pained me to see her just so depressed. I know she felt unwanted and useless. She really had potential to have a good life and get a good job, but the addiction ruined her. A month before she died, her ex-husband died suddenly in his sleep. After that month, she said, "I can't believe Robert is dead. I wonder what it's like to be dead. I'm not suicidal or anything." She died. The same day, where she mentioned Robert, she said the most heartbreaking thing I've ever heard in my entire life. I have a good house in the suburbs and I have nice things. We have an amazing fridge. It had a water and ice dispenser. Big and great bright lighting. It's beautiful. Everything she ever needed. But obviously death reached her hand in the end. She was dying a little day by day. She had a bunch of health problems, and she just wasn't all there. I love my aunt. I really don't know where we go after we die, but I hope she's in a great place because she was a kind and caring person, even though addiction ate her up. I forgot to mention this. A few days after the funeral, my niece had a super weird experience. She was in the kitchen in the dark making a cup of noodles. She saw a dark shadow. It followed her up the stairs, and she said it just sat. By the way it moved, walked, and looked, she could tell it was our aunt. To be honest, my niece really isn't creative enough to make up something like that. It was effing weird. She thinks it's because my aunt was mean to her and felt bad about everything. She said she thought it was her saying goodbye. I've had 3 heart surgeries in my life, and I've been so close to death so many times, I have felt a feeling most would not be able to fathom, particularly during my most recent surgery. I fell into a stage where my heart stopped, and I was considered legally dead. The doctor was able to resuscitate me, and waking me from death is both the most terrifying and amazing feeling I've ever experienced. Terror struck me as I realized that I could have died, but my appreciation for life, from being given a second chance, I now live every second as if it could happen again. Realistically, it could due to my condition. During the moment between my heart being at a holly and regaining consciousness, I cannot even describe the sensation. Besides the emotions with it, my heart felt as if all of the anxiety one experiences during a panic attack had been balled up and squished into my chest. I felt warm and almost tingly. Most people I've told don't necessarily not believe me, but cannot fathom or begin to imagine the feeling. Okay, so this is not my story, but a close friend of mine's that he's told me a few years ago. I asked him if he would write it down and send it to me to put on here, as he isn't on Reddit. I've had to remove some names and place names. Yeah, so girlfriend and I were walking along the beach in Devon with dog in February. It was a quiet, cold day, very windy and lots of mist. We passed a few people, but it was very quiet. We decided to walk up a footpath that leads up onto the cliffs to get a bit of a view. As we walked back to the car, my girlfriend was getting a bit cold and miserable, and my dog was soaked from being in the sea. About 300 meters up the path, the dog started acting strange. He was trying to pull back down the path and growling at the path ahead. We tried to pull him along the path when we both froze. I was completely unable to move. I was frozen solid, as if I was encased in glass. I couldn't move my eyes, my mouth, or anything else. I felt a warmth coming from behind me, like the heat of a fire on my back. Girlfriend was out of view behind me, and dog was now going crazy and barking at something behind me. I felt a sharp pain in my lower back and then blackness. I have no memories of sounds, sights, feelings, or anything else. I came to, lay on the path a few meters further up, completely alone, and the sun was now going down. I didn't feel panicked, I was just very confused and fuzzy, as if I wasn't really inside of my body, sort of dazed. I looked around for anyone else, and there wasn't a soul to be found. I walked up the path and went towards the car. As I got nearer to the car park, I spotted my girlfriend walking towards me. She looked vacant, as if she weren't really present, almost in a trance, perhaps sleepwalking. We both met and walked toward the car in silence. I got in and drove to town. In the car, we exchanged a few words, but not really a conversation. She asked what time it was, and I said I didn't know. She asked what happened, and I replied the same. Back in town, we went back to the B&B. It was now late, so nobody was about. We went to the room and started talking. We couldn't make sense of anything. The girlfriend explained what had happened to her and what she could remember. All she could recall was a sharp pain in her back and then nothing. She didn't remember seeing me until we were in the car and driving. We both came to the realization that the dog wasn't with us, so we decided to go to the local police station. When we got there, we asked to speak to an officer. We explained that the dog was missing and what we remembered happening. The officer took us into an interview room and gave us drinks while another officer sat and accompanied us. Another officer came into the room and said that the dog had been found a few miles along the beach and was taken to a local shelter. We explained what we remembered to the officers, and they took our statements and let us go. They were understandably miffed and couldn't really offer us much help, as there was no criminal wrongdoing for them to investigate. They suggested a visit to the hospital, which we both agreed was a good idea. At the hospital, we explained again to a nurse and doctor who both had no idea what happened. They ran some tests, which all came back normal, and suggested it may have been a seizure or something similar, but As to why we both had them at the same time, they couldn't give us an explanation. A few days later, we were back at our home, still very puzzled and without an answer, but we felt normal again. It was 5 days after the incident that I went back to work. My first day back, around 10:30, I got a call from my girlfriend. She said that there were some reporters at the house who had heard about what happened and wanted to ask some questions. My boss agreed I could leave to go home. He didn't know the real reason, but I made a good excuse. I got home to my girlfriend, who was sitting at the table with 2 men and a woman opposite her, all dressed in suits, all with briefcases and folders on the table. I introduced myself and they did so in turn, then sat down. The 2 men just looked like businessmen, but the lady was dressed in all gray, with gray hair and very stern face. She got out a dictaphone and asked if we were okay with her recording us. She began by showing us photos of the car park that we were parked in, the beach, and the surrounding areas. She asked if that was where we were, and where exactly we were walking. One of the men had a map of the area and was marking locations that we mentioned and drawing lines all over it. The other was writing what we were saying in his notepad. The lady asked some questions about what we remembered, so we told her exactly everything that we could. She kept asking if we remembered anything after our memories went black and was quite persistently asking about it. She was focused on whether or not we remembered anything after the stabbing pain. She wanted to know exactly where the pain was. Did we hear anything, see anything, or taste anything? She wanted to know if we had any unusual dreams, visions, or nightmares. Had we been sleepwalking, waking up in strange places? She even asked if we had been drinking or taking drugs in the months before. All very unusual questions for a reporter to be asking. She didn't even want to talk about the dog and brushed our questions off about him. After 2 hours or so, she switched off the dictaphone, put her paperwork back in her bag, and so did the 2 men, who had remained silent throughout, not a word. She thanked us for our time and made a hasty move for the door. Her girlfriend stopped her and asked her for a card or contact information for the news agency she worked for. She didn't even respond to the question, and hastily jumped in the car with the 2 men and disappeared. Since then, we have heard nothing. No calls, emails, or letters. There hasn't been a single article that we can find on our story. Nothing. We even rang around local news companies and papers, and they had no idea what we were talking about or who they were. Even the police don't know or won't tell us. The strangest part was that we couldn't figure out who these people were or how they knew about what had happened. I doubt the doctors would have told anyone, as they believe it was a medical issue, and the police didn't seem to think much of it. So where did they get the information? We're still not sure exactly what happened to this day. We can only assume and guess. I could write more, but it would go on for a while, so I shortened it down a little. But that is all of the story in a condensed form. One of the craziest things that I've seen is something I did. I was living in the South at the time and had a family friend that needed to be dropped off and picked up from work, as there are no buses in this country and the job was out of the city, a good 20 miles away. Anyway, one night I go and pick him up and he's drunk as a skunk. Yes, he got fired for doing this later. He was a cook and a damned good one, but God, the guy couldn't stop drinking to save his life. Anyway, we're in the car, and he's talking about the cosmos, aliens, telepathic powers, etc. All the cool, drunken, or stoned conversations. Anyway, I was still, and still am, a mediator. I've been mediating since I was a kid, and have never stopped. I started doing it because in comics it seemed to be a gateway to superpowers. I kept doing it because it helped with my severe depression as an adult. When I was a child, I believed I had telekinetic powers, like most kids do, and I specifically remember believing I had pyrokinetic powers for some reason. Anyway, I was an adult and didn't still believe this, but I brought it up in conversation. He starts ranting about how we all have powers and blah blah blah, and he takes out a lighter and asks me to show him. I humor him, flip the lighter up, and at first I'm playing and decide to actually try like I used to as a kid, and Lord and behold, I actually end up effing swaying the fire to any side I wanted, for as long as I wanted. I'm a huge science-based, logical person, so I automatically assumed my breath, maybe wind, or I was holding it at an angle to cause it to sway. So I gave it to him to hold, and I did the same thing. Then I try something that cannot be easily done by wind or angles. I made the fire bigger. The fire stretched and thinned out and grew 3 times its height. And he's freaking out, and I'm freaking out, not believing what the F I just did. I'm actually terrified and realize he's so drunk he's changing the conversation and not truly digesting what the hell just happened. And then he goes home. The next day I bring it up lightly and just ask him if he remembers what I did with the lighter. He says no, but he remembers something weird that happened but can't remember what. I never told him. I never brought it up because it's so effing weird, and I never tried again. I'm too afraid of the actual meaning of something like that. What else would be real? Demons? Ghosts? Everything? Not ready to dive into that kind of stuff. When my grandmother died, I was around 19 years old. She was my best friend and pretty much raised me. She was the only person who ever truly showed me love, and when she died, I felt like I was all alone in the world. She had suffered a long time with a late-diagnosed cancer that was from the talcum powder ovarian cancer connection that is mentioned on TV all the time. I was really bummed that I lost her, and was not dealing with it very well because I really felt like this huge loss of the only security I had in my life at the time, when it came to someone I could truly count on. Shortly after her death, I was walking down the boulevard, and suddenly there was a vision that I saw before me. It was my grandmother's face, but she looked much younger than I ever remembered her, like she did in some of the pictures I've seen of her after she'd gotten married. She looked so incredible, like she did in some of those pictures. And the only word that came to mind was perfection. She looked like perfection. I knew she was in a garden, a beautiful garden, and she looked incredibly content and happy beyond any type of happiness you see on earth. I could tell she was with someone that she was very happy to be with, and I felt this person was Jesus. It was sort of ironic, because one of the songs that was played at her funeral had lyrics that say, "I come to the garden alone, while the dew is still on the roses," and it talks about walking and talking with Jesus, belonging to him, and the joy of being there with him. I knew it wasn't my imagination, because it happened so suddenly, and after it happened, I had this total shift in my heart, mind, and spirit. It was as if I was totally at peace with her being where she was, because I saw how much more perfect this plan was than her being here with me to suffer and be old and sick. She's never been incredibly happy since she lost her husband when her children were young. She lived her life as a widow, had diabetes all her life, and never had much but a simple life. After that, I felt like there was no way I could regret all that happiness that she now had. I felt stronger, as if I could go on and not worry anymore about anything. I knew that I was going to be okay, and that I could make it without my grandmother's help anymore. It was as if I was given a little bit of grace by seeing what I was allowed to see, in order to help me comprehend everything the way I should, and get a better mindset for myself going forward. I was in Latter-day Saints missionary in a small Eastern European country called Moldova back in 2013. A woman from our congregation invited my colleague and me over to help her weed her garden. So we went over, helped weed the garden, and then went inside her apartment to drink some tea and eat some soup. After eating lunch and exchanging some pleasantries, my colleague and I were about to leave when the woman asked us to give us a priesthood blessing. We thought maybe she was physically ill and needed a blessing for her health. But then she explained, over the past few days, she felt that there was some evil presence with her all the time, and whenever she would go in public, like to a grocery store, she would randomly stop what she was doing and start yelling at random passerbys. She said that she would start yelling at them, telling them horrible things about themselves, even though she did not know them. This obviously freaked her out, and she was looking for help. My colleague and I were both naive 21-year-olds and thought she was crazy, even though we knew she was the coolest, most sane person we knew. So we agreed to share our spiritual strength in the name of Jesus Christ in order to cast out any evil presence in the apartment. My colleague raised his right hand at a 90-degree angle and called out any demon in the apartment to leave in the name of Jesus. After he did so, we both felt this odd sensation that we were being mocked. The feeling felt like someone laughing at me saying, "Haha, you guys suck, you can't do it, I'm still here, haha." At this point, The woman asked us to perform the casting out on her, not the apartment, since she would feel her presence no matter where she went. We agreed. So my colleague put his left hand on her head while he raised his right arm again, calling out in the name of Christ to any evil presence in her to leave. Then things got weird. During this ceremony, I had my eyes open, and after my colleague said these words, I literally saw some sort of dark shadow blob leave the woman and then try to attach itself to my friend. After a moment hovering over him, it moved away as if frustrated it couldn't get in. Then it moved on to me. I saw it coming, and then literally felt as if it was pressed up against my chest. What I saw and felt can only be described by the static image and noise coming from an analog TV that's not connected to a station, and the force of this entity was strong. It was not enough to push me to the ground, but it felt immense pressure on my chest. Then a moment later, I could see it leave me and then fly out the window instantly. There was a sense of peace and relief in the room. The woman said she finally felt at peace and thanked us. It was only after that my friend told me that during the second attempt, he didn't see anything but felt a surge of some sort of electricity or power go up his arm and then leave him. I had been a believing Christian in angels and demons before that day, but then I knew there were interdimensional forces out there that sometimes couldn't be explained, but were only believed. This is my one story that no one believes and that I still think about to this day. I was about 20. I work in a private ambulance on the night shift, 10 p.m. to 10 a.m. My partner and I received a call way up in the hills around 2 a.m. It was about a 30-minute drive to the accident with lights and sirens. We got canceled on the run as we got there and headed home. My partner says, "Hey, let's check out my family's old home up here on the way back." So we followed the windy road down the hill, and he says it's the chain-linked, fenced-off abandoned house on the left. The property was taken over by the Department of Water and Power, and the gates were always locked up, according to my coworker. But tonight the gate was wide open, and we pulled in. He tells me how he grew up here as a little kid. We pull onto the lot, park, roll the windows, and turn on all the big scene lights or spotlights that are installed on ambulances. We can clearly see an old white one-story rectangular home, less than 500 square feet, with some windows you could see in, others boarded up. The place is on a dirt lot. First we hear coyotes howling maniacally. Not the scariest thing, but the vibe changed. Next, I begin to hear the clear and rather loud cry of an infant. I freeze. I look at my partner in the seat next to me, and his face changes, but he says nothing. I then take a handheld spotlight and try to see where the howling and crying were coming from. I pan across the old white house, and as I pass the porch and past the light hits the outside of the home, I see an old woman in a yellow robe folding towels in the window. She looks straight at me. I drop the light and say to my partner, "Let's get out of here." He yells back, "Go, go, go." We were both clearly spooked. I put the ambulance in reverse and hit the gas without regard to what was behind us. As we drive down the hill, I tell him what I saw and where I saw it. He pauses and says, "That's my grandma. She always wore a yellow robe, and that room was the laundry room." I asked if he heard the baby crying. He did, and I asked him why he was freaked out as I was. He said he heard a noise and looked up onto the porch of the house. He saw his grandfather sitting in a rocking chair smoking out of a pipe, like he did every night after dinner. Something or someone is out there. I still can't tell you what. To preface, I'm not a writer. This story is 100% true. That means there may be some typos, and it may not be as fantastic as some things you read, but it scared two armed guys who have experience in the woods. My friend and I used to hunt in Ocala National. I would drive us into the forest with all our stuff, and then we would hike for miles. We would look for signs of wildlife, like deer rubs, scrapes, tracks, and poop. We often came across signs of coyotes and bears as well. Often, we would start our hike in the morning, get back in the car, and go get lunch, then return around 1 p.m. and hike until dark. This time, we went in late, like 2 or 3 p.m. I really wanted to check out an area where a controlled burn is just now regrowing its vegetation. Deer paths are a bit easier to follow through those. Hogs bed down in the muddy parts, and it's a perfect spot to set up a stand since it's a wide open area. This area was about 2 miles and another half-mile down an old logging trail. It took about 2 hours to get there. We don't walk loudly or quickly because of the soft sand on the road, and we look for tracks. Sometimes we follow a trail. Now, it's not incredibly desolate. There is a hard clay road we drive on. I drove my BMW 740iL and my Infiniti G37 XS in. Easy. The roads we usually follow on foot are only accessible by a lifted 4x4. But it's clear from the ruts that they're used at least a few times a week. Plus, no matter how far we go in, we find beer cans, bullet casings, and signs of a fire. Usually when we arrive in the morning, there are a few trucks with dog cages parked on the side. The good old boys run dogs through the sector, so we try to avoid those areas. The dogs aren't cute puppies. They're mean and drag wild hogs down by their ears. So, it's best to avoid them and their owners. They're usually good guys, but I'd rather not run into them when they're hunting. Anyway, we went in deeper than usual this time, hoping to get away from all those dogs and noise, and to check out that burned patch that was just starting to grow again. We saw much of the ordinary deer and coyote tracks. We also saw some bear tracks, big ones and little ones, both cool and bad. The only black bear I don't want to see is a mama bear with her cubs. They get very aggressive. So, we reach the burn field and see a whole lot of nothing. We sit for a while and have a snack to see if anything comes through. After about an hour, we decided to explore a small, seemingly fresh trail and then head out, like pushing brush out of the way kind of trail. We found the remains of a very old tree standing down the trail, a beer can that was still shiny, and a pair of underwear that didn't look real old. We thought this was kind of funny. Some dude got drunk and shit himself or something hunting deer. Oh, I should mention, we're armed to the teeth. Both of us have an AR-15 and a sidearm with extra magazines and hunting knives. I'm a decent shot. My friend is an NRA instructor. Anyway, we totally mistimed our walkout, and it got dark while we were still deep in the forest. There was only the sliver of a moon, so it was dark. Luckily, I brought my flashlight, and I had a light mounted on my gun. The trails are marked by ribbons on trees and can be hard to spot at night. I know that because we took the wrong turn. It's around 10 to 11 p.m. at this point, and we're still walking. We came to a crossroad we didn't recognize, and we realized we'd been walking for 30 minutes down the wrong trail. So instead of taking the trail heading west, we just decided to backtrack. You can't really know which direction a trail leads in the forest. On the way back, we started hearing sounds. We figured it was rabbits or squirrels, no problem. So we continue, and the sounds clearly become the movement of one animal. So we turn out the lights, thinking it's a deer or hog, and stop walking. We wait for the sounds to get closer. I slowly realize that this doesn't sound like something moving on 4 legs, but sometimes deer can do that. They step with 2 legs at a time when they're trying to be quiet. The sounds suddenly stop. The deer must have smelled us, but it felt like it stopped close by. So I turned my light on and panned around. Now remember, this trail is barely wide enough for us to stand next to each other, so it's just a forest on both sides, and you can't see far in. I shine around and see and hear nothing. We wait a moment, then give up and keep walking. Another 20 to 30 minutes go by, and we start hearing rustling again. This time, something is really moving, not tiptoeing around. We figured it was a group of hogs, which made us a little nervous. Those things can suddenly surround you without you even realizing it. But it clearly sounded like it was on our right. Also, small animal sounds like bears when it's dark are quiet, much louder than you would think. We stop on the trail to let whatever is coming pass over the trail in front of us. As soon as the rustling gets near the trail, I turn on my rifle light, and my friend shines the flashlight directly down the trail in front of us. About 30 yards in front of us, we just see a pair of white legs cross the trail and then disappear into the woods. Okay, now we're freaked out. They looked human, and it takes another 45 minutes of walking to get to the 4x4 only road. Then it will be 10 to 15 minutes until we reach the car. And it all starts with a walk straight ahead, where the thing crosses the trail. We were definitely weirded out. But both of us were armed and ready, so we just kept going. There's not much else to do. Not to mention that it's midnight and we are tired. We hear the noises once more in the distance, but they never come closer. We reach the car, and usually we like to hang out for a while, check out the stars, and talk, but we both had a gut feeling to just get in the car and go. We kept our guns loaded, and hopped in the front seat. Remember, I'm driving a normal sedan, not some off-road vehicle, so I have to take it easy turning around and leaving. I can't speed down this road, it's hard clay, but rain creates divots, ruts, and mud. Well, I go not even a quarter mile down the road and have to swerve around a deep rut. My headlights fall on a guy standing there about 10 feet from the road. No trail or road is going on. He is in a farmer's shirt and shorts. No backpack, gun, hat, flashlight, or anything I could see. He didn't wave at us like he was lost, just standing there. He didn't look at us while we passed him, but he stared slowly walking down the road as we went by. This is not an area where anyone has cabins for many, many miles, nor is there any civilization for a good 10 miles. This guy had no reason to be there. Is this guy what we saw cross our paths? How would he trample through the woods for miles? The brush is not like the pinewood forest of the Northeast. It's thick shrub and nettles and palmetto bushes that cut you, snakes, ticks, and all kinds of bullshit. I wouldn't walk through it in long-sleeve hoodie and jeans and boots, let alone a short-sleeve t-shirt and shorts. And why was he following us? Did we stumble upon him or this guy's hangout spot when we found the fresh beer cans and underwear? We did not call the FWC or the police. I don't know why. I guess we just did not want to deal with them. Plus, they would be suspicious of us being out in the woods that late. We were both certain we saw human legs cross the trail, but it seemed so unlikely that we decided that we were seeing shit. Then, we see this guy standing in the pitch dark with no moon and no flashlight. What? If it were true that this crazy F was stomping around thick brush, he had been close enough to us that if he charged, he definitely could have tackled one of us before we could react. This is the weirdest thing that has happened to me in Ocala National Forest. I'm not scared to go back. Typically, whenever the dogs run in a safe area, they scare off any national or anything that would hurt you, including people. But I would rather not walk for hours in the pitch dark, just hoping our flashlight didn't run out of battery. We had our phones turned off to save battery in case they were needing to be making an emergency call, if we even had service. At least we could use it as an emergency flashlight. Feel free to ask questions. I may have misremembered some parts. I wrote this at different times throughout the day, so there are many different versions and many different times throughout the day. Some things do not line up. I'll fill in those gaps tomorrow. It's 3:30 a.m. now, and I don't want to edit on mobile.